Ladies and gentlemen, today we welcome on for his long overdue Tackle Talk debut, one of the busiest men in kayak fishing, our friend Drew Gregory. And yes, we have some high-level kayak talk today and a little peek into the state of the industry when it comes to the kayak world, but the main reason we wanted to have Drew on today was to talk about one of my favorite things to do and one of his too, and that's fishing in the current. All of that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
Welcome to the Tackle Talk podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. World-class fishing gear, unmatched personal service. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, we are brought to you by American Legacy Fishing. And it is mid-November, which means it's the most glorious time of the year. It's Black Friday sale time. And ALF is kicking off Black Friday season by releasing their Black Friday sales a full 3 weeks early this year. So if you go to www.americanlegacyfishing.com and click the banner at the top of the homepage that says Black Friday, you'll see that they have the following offers currently available on the website. Get ready for this. They have 40% off all Berkley products, 30% off all Fenwick rods, 25% off all Dobbins rods, 20% off all Beast Coast gear, 30% off all Sunline, 20% off all Baits reels, 25% off of Yamamoto, 25% off Phoenix rods, and a ton more, including some Easter eggs on the website that I'm not allowed to tell you about, but if you find them, congratulations. And if you do have a little trouble finding them, just shoot me a DM. I'll help you out. But all of that is available over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com, where Black Friday starts a full 3 weeks early this year. And as always, if what you're looking for is not already on sale, use code TACKLETALK10 to save 10% on almost everything else. Again, that's www.americanlegacyfishing.com and use code TACKLETALK10. All right, folks, as we said in the intro, today we have a great conversation with a guy that's truly one of the OGs of competitive kayak fishing. He's got a full trophy case to prove it, but he's also a successful YouTuber, a product designer, and a small water aficionado. It's Mr. Drew Gregory. And it's really that last bit, I think, that gets me so excited because you guys know I love small water. I grew up fishing small creeks. I still love to wet wade and kayak small, fast, shallow water, and being immersed in this sort of kind of fast current, small water lifestyle has taught me so much about fish behavior over the years in general, whether it's in a moving water situation or not. I just feel like I've learned a lot biologically by observing those fish in those small, fast ecosystems, and I really feel like for me as an angler, it's probably my biggest strength, which is why it's so much fun and such a treat to get to talk to someone like Drew, who's just flat out way better at it than I am on the exact thing that I think is probably my biggest personal strength. So I was really excited to get the chance to pick Drew's brain on a lot of the things that relate to my favorite type of fishing in heavy current, and it did not disappoint. And with that, I will waste no time here. Let's jump right into our conversation with the one and only Drew Gregory. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by, I'm going to try and get the whole resume here, man. We got 2024 Bass Kayak Champion, 2022 Bass Kayak Angler of the Year, 2020 Hobie Angler of the Year, 9 career dubs, the founder of the Kayak Adventure Series Tournament Trail. It is Drew Gregory. Drew, thank you so much for popping on Tackle Talk today.
Man, I'm excited to be on the show, man. It's been a while. I know you and I emailed a long time ago about it and then just never got around to doing one. And this just worked out perfectly when you told me what we were going to talk about tonight. So I'm excited to be here. And yes, you got the resume down pretty well there. So
Yeah, I'm excited too. I told you before we started recording, like this is right up my alley. I'm so pumped because you fish very, very similar to how we fish around here in kind of southern Ohio and this moving water, and we'll get to some of that here in a little bit. But I want to start first on just like the kayak side of things in general, because I don't think anybody's going to argue. You are one of the most consistent anglers in the kayak game today. And, you know, I would even argue regular bass fans, right? There's only so many names, I think, in the kayak world that even regular bass fans have kind of broken out and, you know who they are, and you do have this name recognition. It's hard to break out of that kayak niche and kind of be seen by more of the whole bass fishing community, whether it's, you know, with the Crescent stuff that you do, with the kayak adventure series, with your partners, just the success in general. But today we're going to dive into the first part of this, really heavy into the kayak specific stuff. So my first question, I'm going to hit you with a doozy right off the bat, but I'm really excited to see how you answer this. So I want to ask you where you think kayak fishing is in general today, like the state of kayak fishing from someone that's been in it since it kind of really got off the ground and got going. What's 2024 like a status update of kayak fishing?
I love it, man. This is like right at my wheelhouse, talking like almost like the bigger 30,000 foot, view. Like, I don't know if you know this, but like my master's degree is in sports management. And I know you work in that industry as well.
Yep.
So it's sports and business. And so I am always thinking about this kind of stuff. So here's what I will say about like kayak fishing, where we're at, the state of it. So, and I'll use an example, an illustration that'll help people, I think, understand where we're at and where I feel like we should be going and the mistakes we're making, because we're part of the bass fishing, like the whole economics of bass fishing, right?
Yeah.
And it's no different than bass fishing is no different than a lot of other sports, right? Think about a sport like volleyball. You've got indoor volleyball and you've got sand volleyball, right? And if there was no sand volleyball, the total economy of that sport wouldn't be as big. And if there's no, dirt track racing compared to the pavement racing, right? Or concrete, whatever, then the sport of racing wouldn't be as big. So kayak fishing kind of grew the sport of bass fishing and all fishing. It's not like you just fish for bass, of course, in a kayak, but that's mainly what we're talking about. So the thing that it really kind of almost frustrates me and where I think we need to be going, because we've done well and we've sold a lot of kayaks, we've grown the sport, but we're kind of swerving and we're looking at our predecessors, the bass boat world, and seeing how they've done things. And especially on the tournament side, we're kind of mimicking and starting to try to copy them and veer closer to their lane. It'd almost be like in sand volleyball. If someone said, hey, let's put some sneakers on and let's pat this sand down really, really hard. And let's not wear swimsuits anymore. It's like, wait a second. This is basically indoor volleyball now. Like, yeah, doesn't make any sense. So we actually, I think, should be highlighting what makes the kayak special. And I think people are going to expect me to say what makes it special is that it goes in all this skinny and shallow water, rivers and creeks and backwaters that I love. But that's not really the whole story. What makes it special is that it can do that and go places that boats can't, but it also can do all of the above that a boat can. Like it go offshore in Erie. I mean, I've been in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with it before, and on the Gulf and in the Atlantic. I've been in every ocean situation, and it is a stable, solid platform and safe platform as long as you know what you're doing, even in those situations. So the middle of Champlain, you could be out there and fishing with live scope and using all the same tools that were obviously originally intended for a bass boat before there were, kayaks, fish finders, power poles, you name it. But they will work on a kayak. So that's the beauty of the kayak to me, is it can do all of the above. So where I feel like we're missing the mark, to finally getting around to my main point with this question, is actually that when golf got big, remember like Tiger Woods back in I think it was like 97 or 98, 99, somewhere there, he really took off. And all of a sudden the sport of golf just exploded. And they had a problem in the sense that the courses got full because everyone wanted to get in and play golf. And when the courses got full, people are a little frustrated, rubbing elbows, and they're waiting for tee times. And then the courses said, well, there's this demand, so we're going to hike the price up of tee times, playing greens fees, I guess what I meant to say, hiking the price up. So now the cost is more expensive. You got to wait forever to play. You can't even get tee times. This kind of isn't very fun anymore. So the sport kind of topped out, and the number of people that could participate because there's only so many courses. So what did they do? They looked around, they said, there's a bunch of land over there. There's a bunch of land over there. Let's just build some more golf courses. So they built more golf courses to meet that demand. The problem we have in bass fishing is there are only so many of these big lakes, so many of these courses, so to speak. We did a good job of bass fishing. They were like ESPN and 90s and early 2000s. It like hit this peak. We're giving $1 million away, $3 million, whatever David Dudley won or whatever. Like all this money's getting thrown around and big non-endemics and Walmart. And the sport, exactly what happened with golf, topped out. That's it, topped out. You cannot have, because people will go to the lake, and if there's too many people at the boat ramp and you got to wait forever to launch, then you just say, I'm sick of this, and you leave. Or, you just like, I'm out of this sport. Or you're out on the lake and everyone's all on your spots and it's crowded. You're like, I'm out of this. So it kind of just had a cap. But kayak fishing came along, and I feel like that's where you can meet that demand of, well, it can go in all these other waters. And on the tournament side of things, which what we're trying to do with the Kayak Adventure series, and some of the other series do this too, but our format is we don't need one giant 25,000, 75,000 acre lake, because bass boats launch from one launch for a reason. They have to check live wells. They have to make sure, because they're bringing fish in for a weigh-in, they got to make sure that people don't already have fish in their live wells. It's easy to cheat, obviously, when that's the case. So, and then of course they use their outboards to get around that 25,000 acre lake. We don't have a rule set like that. We use catch, measure, photo, release, right? So why in the world are we not taking advantage of these other quote unquote golf courses that are all out there and available? And we're not doing it as well as we could be. So the sport of fishing could be growing bigger. And it's not a competition between the bass boat worlds and the kayak at all. But with the economy and situations like we've had some dips in the economy, it's like an economy proof sport. So, and people that get out of bass boat fishing might get into a kayak to save money too. So it's kind of like, to me, we should be pushing that whole side of it, growing in the areas that it can grow in, and then we'll be capped. One day we will be capped. There will be too many people, even on all the rivers and everywhere, because population is growing. But we just, why we're veering back towards the bass boat structure and side of things, I'm not sure, but not me. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what you do, and that's not what we're going to talk about today. And it's not what the Kayak Adventure series does. Obviously, it's about wild, remote places. So,
well, and that's what, like, again, what I'm about to say, and almost everything I'll probably say on this topic, like, I know very well that I'm an armchair quarterback in this. Like, I'm not out there competing on all these circuits and stuff. I'm just like outsider looking in. If I was on those circuits, I don't want to take my kayak and go fish Gunnersville. I want to go fish places that, again, the boat guys can't go, that can't sustain an elite series event. Or I want to go places that are unique and cool fisheries that only we could go to, because like you said, that is the magic of a kayak. The kayak has the ability to succeed in places boats can't. And I think sometimes we get too hung up on the budget side of things. Like, yes, it's true that kayak fishing is a budget-friendly way to get into competitive fishing comparatively to a bass boat, right? We're still probably at the point where, I don't know, a fully rigged, even if you go, ham on a kayak setup, you're a 10th, a 12th, a 15th the cost of a fully rigged, tournament bass boat setup. So it is still budget friendly, but we get so caught up on that where then when we get to the point, inevitably there is like a tipping point where, technology gets pushed further, boats get better, kayaks get better, it gets more expensive, and then you lose those people because they thought that was the selling point of your sport. They thought the selling point of kayak fishing was, I can go compete and win this event with a $200 kayak. That shouldn't be, at least for me, what kayak fishing and tournament side of things should be focused on. It should be more on the magic of the places you get to go and the unique aspects of kayak fishing, not just the budget side.
Yeah, 100%, because the courses do get stagnant. Like, the problem is, so people are missing the mark a little bit on this whole live scope issue. It really is, information is what is the biggest reason that the youth are so good these days. It's not just the electronics and live scope. It's literally the combined information that the older anglers that kind of have a little bit of a gripe with it. They're the ones who put it all out on the YouTube. All the videos that are out on YouTube and all the lakes that have already been exposed and the places they were and the spots. No sport, in my opinion, there's no sport in the world where, other than bass fishing, I'd say it's the number one where information will gain you more of an advantage than anything else. Like I'm talking about like legal information, not like if you steal the signs in football. I'm talking
Right.
like you could tell a golfer, this is what you're supposed to do with your swing 1,000 times, and they still have to actually go do that, right?
Yep.
You can tell someone where the bass live and why, or a spot, or what they're doing, and yeah, they still have to go out there and catch them. But if they are proficient,
It's like showing you the read on your putt. Yeah, you still have to go out and putt it, but you're showing me the recipe.
Exactly.
It's like the old, what was the Tiger Woods video game where you could do Tiger Vision and it would show you the exact line. You still had to hit it, but it's helping you a lot.
Dude, I'm glad you said that. I've actually used that exact analogy before. You give a PGA Tour the read from a 10-foot putt, and there's a much greater odds he's going to make the putt now.
Yeah.
You give all the bass fishermen, the youth especially, that are really good with the electronics as well, which is just information. Live scope is information. It's just more information. So combine that information with all the information that's out there on YouTube that we've been teaching, and people are teaching it because they get paid, because YouTube pays them in views. So it's kind of like this vicious cycle, right? That I hate giving information away like for free that's why I don't do YouTube videos telling all my secrets. And it frustrates me when I see that, but I get it. That's their revenue stream. That's their business model. It's like, I'm going to give away all the information. The problem is the sport of bass fishing it's like, once you understand how to cast and all the lures and the techniques and tactics, the main ones, you don't have to know all of them, obviously, but the main ones, it's more about just knowing where the fish are and why. And then you give that away, and it's kind of like, there you go. Or waypoints, stuff like that. The boulders don't move. Like the Johnson brothers have always said on the St. Lawrence, and they that fishery, and those are more consistent every year. And like, going back to your point about new places, it just gets boring because we've seen it on like ad nauseum at this point. These same locations, the same thing. Obviously, it's a little bit different story every time. Who's going to win? How it's going to happen? And the fish are certainly, creatures that we'll never completely figure out. So they don't always do the exact same stuff, but you get a point. It's kind of like we've seen it, done it. So these new venues, like we're talking about, are, just great to be able to expose, because the tourism departments in those cities also never been knocked on their door to say, hey, we'd love to hold this big tournament here and show off how amazing your rivers, lakes, and creeks are, because they don't happen to have this one single 25,000 acre lake. And they are just like, what? Like, you're just telling them what they already believe. Anyone that works for a chamber of commerce feels like they live in the coolest city, that's the most unique and special city in the entire world. And you go in there, you're just telling them how great the rivers, lakes, and creeks are. And they're like, yes, where do we sign the check? Like, come on. So, but anyway, another little point to tag along with this, we could probably rant on this all day long, but would be the issue I think also we're kind of having, and I think kayak fishing, it kind of goes back to your questions, helps solve this, at least if the format doesn't veer too much towards bass boat fishing, is think about how most of the tournaments now in the Bassmaster, Major League Fishing, not all of them, and they're doing their best to change the schedule and go different places and times of the year where live scope isn't going to dominate. But we know that most events, somebody with live scope in the majority of the field, catching check, will probably find a way to use it somewhere. And it's only going to get better, even for shallow water stuff like that you and I love to do on that perspective mode. It's who would have thought, oh, we're going to Lake Okeechobee, was it 2 years ago?
Yeah,
can't wait to see some frog, and Tyler Rivette goes in the canal. Boom, live scopes, and they'll find a way to use that tool and continue to get better at it and win with it. So what I feel like that's done with the sport, because every sport that's been successful, if you think about it, most of them have all been successful for a few reasons. One, they figure out how to be good on TV, and football is one of the best examples. It's very exciting. They got lots of camera angles. Obviously, built their brand, taken a long time. And two, they keep their cost of entry down pretty low, like soccer. And soccer is fun to watch on TV. Cost of entry is super low. It's a ball, and that's it, man. Like, you can go play it in your backyard, net a ball. Bass fishing, I feel like it's gone the opposite direction. We keep making the sport more expensive and the cost of entry more expensive. And we're not that great on TV because, live, don't get me wrong, it's fine. We have many hours, so it's not condensed like a soccer game is 90 minutes, or a football game is these 4 hours, or a baseball game is whatever, 2.5, 3 hours, whatever it ends up being. But they're not 4 days. Like, no one watches all of a PGA golf tournament. They watch the Sunday afternoon, the back nine. That's about it. So we're not condensed. And then the other problem that I feel live scope is brought to the sport, and I'm pro live scope. is the fact that it makes the tournaments a little bit more kind of like predictable. Like, oh, how's he going to get one this time? Oh, live scope again. Oh, live scope again. And that's not as exciting. Think about if football took away the pass because they said, oh, receivers are getting hurt going across the middle, or too many injuries. I know it's an exciting play, the pass is, and it's really acrobatic and fun to watch and great on TV, but we're getting rid of it because of whatever reason. Okay, well, every play's a run, and the sport is more boring. It's like UFC is exciting because there's lots of different styles of fighters coming together to see who wins in the octagon. And boxing never took, I mean, obviously it was big in its heyday, but it never continued as quite as big as I think the UFC obviously has gotten worldwide, because it's like, okay, it's just punching. It's not, you can't do anything else. So we've kind of taken our sport and I don't know if neutered is the right word a little bit, but it's kind of like, we know how it's going to get won most of the time. And it's kind of a little bit more boring to watch too. So it's not as fun. So I think kayak fishing has a chance, based on what you and I are going to really get into here about shallow water fishing, the ability to do the offshore stuff and go super skinny and shallow. You don't know how it's going to get won, especially with a format like the Kayak Adventure Series, where people can launch any public launch and go and portage over logs and rapids they don't feel comfortable, going up or down or whatever. Then it's like, you just don't know where it's going to get one, what body water, what species, could be a guy with 2 and 3 rods and a little 10 to 11 foot kayak, and that's all he's got. Or it could be someone that literally has all of, $20,000 set up with everything. And that's exciting. That's like the UFC right there. It's a bunch of styles coming together, battling out, and then seeing who wins. And this year we proved most all of our events, it was actually the top 10. I mean, it's staggered between everything. Oh, I was river, I was creek, I was lake, it was like just staggered. So it's pretty cool, and that's what makes it exciting, and that's what's I think gone away from the main like pro bass boat fishing world. You kind of get more predictable based on the history we have of the YouTube videos and all the tournaments we've done, / now with that tool being so darn good. It's reading the putt, like you said. It's more than that for those guys.
Well, the very last thing I want to ask you before we get into the current here is, where do you think the next frontier in kayak fishing is? Like, where do you see the trends going? Because, like, is it, more electronics? Is it better motors? Is it power poles? Is it new propulsion systems, bigger or smaller, lighter setups, material changes? Like, where do you think we end up in the next couple of years?
I mean, I think there's always going to be some, like 2 ends of the spectrum, because you can, as you can see, I mean, recently I had this video and this setup I had on my kayak go viral because I put 2 power pole blades on there, like those little 4-footers, and very polarizing. I mean, it's like between all the platforms, it's well over 1 million like views in that thing. So there will always be people that they're going to have that, plus my Torpedo like I have, plus the live scope, plus like, I mean, everything. And that's like Gene Jensen. He's got tons of electronics and graphs. I think he's got like 3 and everything else. And Bailey's got Hydrowave, right? And he uses anything and everything too. And that's kind of cool, like that we can do that. But then the cool thing about that is, and this is where I think bass boats have kind of gone wrong, I think they should bring back allowing a 150 or a 16-foot boat or a tunnel hole or the A-rig or a standing platform that's like limit them to like 2-foot high standing platforms, something like all of those things don't even add up nearly close to the advantage of live scope combined.
Yeah, it's crazy that the A-rig is still locked up, but we can see what's going on under the water at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, they should bring all that back if they're going to continue to allow the forward-facing sonar. They should bring that back, because then we could at least see some fishing in the other direction, have a chance. Because right now, it's like John Cox, and on the MLF side, Keith Boucher. It's almost like you just don't see your Bill Lowens and Hackneys and the people that you're known, the Mark Menendez or Steve Kennedy's. You just don't see them winning anymore, even coming like, even the check range is challenging for now. John Cox is your outlier, but, and that's why I'm saying, like, there's like one outlier out of 100 elite anglers where, okay, it's either going to be one this way or John Cox. So guess what I'm saying is it's going to keep polarizing itself in the kayak world to further and further either direction. And I've got multiple kayaks. One of them is stripped down with nothing on it. It's actually a blim that's like 50 pounds. It's like this Crescent Shoaly I've got one that's like 50 pounds. And I've got an ultralight some Crescent that's also the same weight. But obviously, if I got the Shoaly that I designed it for 50 pounds, I'm going to take that one. So that's like a stripped down lightweight for throwing off the bridges and accesses that are tough and dragging places and rivers. And just the paddle is all I'll take with that one. And my maybe a one small size black pack, that 13 by 13 Yak Attack black pack. And that's like it. That's all I need is a few rods. And then the other setup, obviously, and I feel like people are going to, because like you said earlier, the kayak's so inexpensive. And even if you put everything on it, it's still like a tenth of the price of a fully rigged bass. But I think anglers, and I've been doing this for a long time now, like 3 or 4 years, will start bringing and having more like professional or more serious anglers, right? On the kayak side, we'll start bringing 2 kayak setups to every event because they're just tools for the job. You know what I mean? So, and I've always had a couple with me because if I need a motor and whatever, like the electronics or anything else, it's there on that one. If I need, just to put it now, when they made some rule changes, we have designated launches now, which was one thing that's kind of, like I said, veering us towards the bass boat side. We have designated launches we have to use in some of these series, and there's no one there to check you in. So I don't really know what it's solving really, because someone could still be launching from anywhere random they want to, you know what I mean? And that's fine. But I just wish let's just stop there, because you have to have a motor now, basically. I didn't have to. When I won all this stuff, these trophies and stuff, every one of those except for the Bassmaster Championships this year, even in events with motors allowed, I didn't win anything with a motor or a graph. It was all just like
bare bones,
instinctual, like, launching and, in public accesses, bridges and places that maybe other people didn't want to because they didn't want to do the work or whatever, but it's all legal for anybody. And I just chose to do it. And I mean, don't get me wrong, other people did as well, but fish places like that. But obviously, I've just been doing it a little while. So I don't know. I just feel like we should just stop the bleeding now, and then kind of veer back if we can in any way possible to, make that what makes the kayak special. We don't want to take that part being so shallow. Like we can't take that part of it out because that is what makes it so unique, because the boat can't do that and go shallow and skinny and in the current necessarily and do some of the things, down rapids and whatnot, the places that we can take the kayak. So if you're continue to make formats and rules that don't allow that, then it's almost like, why are we in kayaks at that point? Why are we doing this? And it just becomes, like I said, sand volleyball becomes indoor and that whole analogy. But yeah, I think it's just going to keep polarizing itself and going further and further. People are going to keep pushing the directions on either one of those boundaries, lighter kayaks, inflatables that you're seeing getting popular now and stuff like that. And then the opposite, they're going to be which like the new Bonafide XTR is a mini bass boat. That's all it is. It's literally a bass boat. You can stay on the deck. So we're already seeing it. We do need to regulate at some point. The organizations will have to actually define the same way that they said there's a maximum number of inches. Is it inches they're doing this year with Bassmaster for the graphs? We're going to have to say, okay, you can have this giant wide thing, but it can only be so long. Or you could have this long skinny thing that can go fast, but then it's a total number of, it can only be so wide. We're going to have to define it. We're going to have to define even if materials that are allowed, things like that, because at what point if a kayak manufacturer just comes up, I don't know, that XTR is about 13 foot, I think, from Bonafide, and there's other like the Native Titan, there's new canoes, there's things that are very big. They're very much quote unquote boats. In all kayaks are boats, but these are very much like at what point, if they come out with a 14 foot, 15 foot, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, yeah, it's going to come to the point where they're going to CNC something and be like, oh, it's a 14-foot CNC'd kayak. You're like, no, that's a John boat. What are you talking about? Like, we're in the boat world at this point. So you do need cutoffs at some point.
The only bass boat I ever owned, dude, and they don't make these anymore, I guarantee you that. I mean, the brand isn't even around, but I doubt. But it was a 14-foot glass stream, fiberglass bass boat that was 14 foot. That's crazy.
That's
and when you
so
think
cool.
about it, that was cool. It was very cool. I bought it in college. It was just like on the side of the road, like kind of almost like broken down, and just offered the guy, I think it was like $800 or something. He took it. And, but our rotor-molded watercraft now, whatever you want to call them, kayaks, whatever, they're the same size as the bass boat I had. And so where do you draw the line? We gotta stop it now before it gets out of control on that side of things. So, and I don't know if Tiny Boat Nation, the tiny boat world will almost merge with, because there's a big following with that style of fishing, tiny boat.
Mm-hmm.
So it still blows me away that like even the bass boat world hasn't, and I know it's because of historical data and what they've done forever, but hasn't even thought about maybe we should just catch, measure, release our fish like kayaks. It's like, it's a better determination of the length is a better predictor of the age. Age is a better predictor of the skill it took for the angler to catch that fish. Therefore, because you can't really target fat necessarily, it's kind of hard to do. So it's just odd to me that and it's better for the fish just to get released right there. You can see their pictures of the fish live, and then let them bring in, one or two fish that are over a certain size, maybe, or something, and then. Yeah. But
you know how that goes, man. They don't want to change.
They want to change. Yeah, they want to change.
Nobody wants to change in fishing.
Oh yeah. Hey, let's do this now. Someone pin this part of the podcast. And when you and I, maybe we're dead. I don't know when this is going to happen, but maybe we're still alive. Someone mark this now, that I predict that weighing fish in for bass tournaments one day will be looked at almost like the same way we look at smoking on airplanes. Now, like we did that, like we smoked on airplanes.
Yeah.
We're freaking crazy.
Wouldn't that be
crazy.
Nuts? There'd be no weigh-ins. Yeah.
Yeah, in the 80s. But because there's 4K video and 6K and 8K, it's only going to get better. You got a TV screen right there. You have the ability to show all that video you're taking out there, which is even more exciting for the fans who are 200 feet back and you're holding a 3-pounder. Whoop-de-doo. Like, that's not why they're coming to the weigh-in anymore, guys.
If they can figure out how to replicate the winning moment with that, it'll be fine. Because the one thing that you can't argue is if you watch like a Major League Fishing event, the time expires, you know who wins. That moment is on the boat, out on the water, private kind of.
Yes.
Yeah, you're live streaming it. But then when you come back and you do the whole, on the trailer thing, it feels fake. Like it feels forced because we've already had the celebration. This is just like a photo op basically, where at least with a real live weigh-in, there is the true crowning of the winner live there, and you do get the celebratory moment that's real. So if they can find a way to, I don't know how they do that, but to have that actual moment where the winner is determined still happen on stage without fish being involved at all, I think that's the secret that they've got to figure out.
Dude, that's cool. It's cool to think about, like, because we use theaters for the Kayak Adventure series, and we post the GoPros, the headline sponsor. We post any videos that we have of the anglers that they gave us. They kind of cover themselves, they film themselves, and it takes 2 seconds to trim a video, get it from your GoPro onto your phone, and send it to us. So Bassmaster, with their money and production, I'm not saying they're rolling in it, but they obviously have a production team. If they could somehow almost like, man, it'd be tricky with the live, but man, we cut our tournaments off, our standings in kayak fishing at a certain time. There's like 2 hours or 3 hours that you don't see, the results are hidden because they're always live, just like a golf leaderboard. But if you could somehow cut off live at some point, I know you're going to miss the last minute drama and stuff like that, but you could then do it like you're saying on stage, and maybe they start using smaller like venues like arenas or smaller or just even theaters like I'm talking about. There's a lot of great theaters that seat thousands, really cool places that air conditioning, people are comfortable, and you can have a little festival like they do now, but then everyone goes in for these crowning moments, and I think that'd be kind of cool if they could then have this edit. And then it's and then it goes live. It's like a 30-minute live show, and where like the old school days, where it was all condensed, right?
Yeah.
So they have a little condensed thing. You give time for the anglers to get back. So there's a little gap in time, and the editing, they could start pulling in any fish in the last couple hours that matter, and then somehow, boom, make that like a live show and the anglers on stage. And then they don't know when they're hooked, when the angler's hooked up. Only the angler that's video is being played actually knows if he catches it or not. And then the drama that would happen if he actually lands it or if he loses it. And then the other angler all of a sudden then knows, like, I freaking won this thing. That coming together could be like the ultimate.
That's what you need, because even in bass right now, you still most of the time, if not all the time, know who won before they're going up. You just still have the official weigh-in, and sometimes you have some surprises, but they try and do the thing where they cut off bass track, like whatever it is, an hour, out or something, so you don't see like the actual weights. But if you're watching it you know what's happening. Like you can keep track yourself. So yeah, that's
dude, that would be cool,
I'm sure
man.
we'll figure it out at some point, but I feel like that's what's missing. And I think that's what the Bassmaster Classic does so well is even if you know who probably won, the fanfare that they create on it is enough. Where like your point with the Kayak Adventure series, right? You're creating like almost like a festival around it. There's another reason to attend other than the actual seeing of the results. So you do have, things you can buy and things you're going around and an expo and meet and greets and that type of stuff. And then at the end, you're right, maybe you do show the last 15 minutes of live there. You don't show it on the internet anymore. You keep recording, cut it, show it in the arena or whatever, and everybody watches the end together, and then you have the celebration or something. I don't know. I think there's some room to improve there a little bit.
Absolutely, man. If you think about it, if they cut that off like a couple hours before, and all 10 anglers have a camera on them, so they have all the footage of all the fish catches that then matter, and they can hold, if they're using link, this would be so much easier. They could just, and they would save so much money. Think about how much money they would save on live release boats and tanks and the people that have to deal with all that and all that goes into fizzing the fish and all this stuff. It's like all around, which I guess you have to do anyway because the fish are up. But there's a lot of things that like you and money that goes into that whole process of keeping them in these little aquariums and driving them all around and blah blah blah. So you'd eliminate all that cost and you could put that into this production and take all the best clips. And you'd have a timestamp of like, okay, this happened. It's really, because trust me, I'm not like one of those people that just saying this is easy, but I have done this to some degree with the Kayak Adventure series and getting footage. It's really not like that hard for someone who professionally knows what they're doing. You get all those camera guys, you get the clips because they're getting the clips now and they can pull them and replay them. Just put them in the right order and it's all, it could be a random that people come up randomly and someone takes the hot seat, like which happens in the Elite Series right now anyway. And then they kind of come up in random order and then they show the clip of, the last couple catches that matter that would be exciting for the crowd. And it is this like condensed 30 or just even an hour show because you're still going to have talking to the anglers on stage. So it's like an hour-long show. It makes it more palatable for the TV audience because we talked about all sports that have been majorly successful have found a way to be consumed really well on television. And we're just kind of lengthy with that many days. We love it because we're fishermen, dude. We love it. But people that don't fish or don't really follow it and do it as much as we do, they're not watching all that. So anyway, it's just a lot of cost and expense. It's, but yeah, we can get into the topic because we can rant about this all day long.
Well, this takes us into obviously the main reason that wanted to have you on today and wanted to talk is fishing in the current. And it kind of ties in kind of nicely because some of the stuff we talked about that kind of, irks me and a lot of people sometimes a little bit about kayak fishing is all of that stuff. The more you add to your kayak, the more, money you're spending and stuff. A lot of that is actually detrimental to success in the current. Like a heavier kayak, more electronics aren't helping you in that current. Like it is, like you said, instinctual. It is biology. It is past success and drawing on past experiences to know what to do. You have to be able to handle your watercraft so much more efficiently in that current. So I'm really excited to talk to you about fishing in the current today because I know you're one of the best at it in a shallow kayak. So the first thing, what draws you overall like so much to the current? Like you as an angler, why do you tend to gravitate so much toward fishing in current?
I think like all of us and all of our setups and the way and the style we like to fish tend to come from our actual just God-given personalities. And I have a lot of energy. I'm very like, I'm sure I overwhelm people at times and I know I do, and I apologize, but I just have a lot of energy and a lot of just, I don't know, I'm fidgety. And so I can't really fish slow. I can't, and current is giving you one other obstacle and something to always be like navigating, you know what I mean? And kind of trying to figure out what's happening with it. And it's just more challenging. And then at the same time, it's fast paced. It's the fish are very aggressive. It positions them in places where it's a little bit more predictable and you can just make lots of numbers of casts, which again fits my personality, my style of fishing. Just power fish, as many casts as you can. And based on my knowledge and experience, it kind of like, knowing where to cast and when and why. It's not like I just hit everything in sight and that's it. There's still a method to the madness. There's places I power fish. I like paddle or motor through quickly and then focus on other areas. And they're not the most obvious things that people think. It's not like it's just like that visible boulder and that visible stump and this. There are a lot of nuances that we'll probably get into in the show that with current, with like a laminar flow and flats and things that, people, their fish, they'll get on the inside bend. People don't realize that they'll utilize the inside bend of rivers sometimes. It's rare, but there are certain times there's all these different nuances and things that from a tournament perspective, which is kind of what I, do a lot. Obviously it makes that a little bit of difference. You know what I mean? Knowing where you can pick up a little extra fish here or there, kind of adds up in the end. So yeah, that's how it fits me and why it fits me for sure. It's just fast paced action.
I think the thing that I really like about it, I'm such a, and I know you are too, like an analytical person. Like my brain is always firing in terms of like what makes certain things do certain things. And I like, just it gives me peace in my brain, the predictability of current. I like the fact that it's, the flow of things. It's consistent. It almost like breathes life into an ecosystem. It's like the stimulant for a lot of things. If you have current, you're not going to have stagnant, lazy fish. You've got these, things that are going to make sense that translate from river to river, creek to creek, like watching how fish relate to breaks in the current and, a submerged rock that's in, 4 foot of water with the strong part of the current going on the outside of it and shallow on the inside. Like all that stuff, you can take that and you can analyze a situation in your little creek, and then you can blow it up 10x on a river, and those fish will a lot of times act the exact same. That's why I think when I grew up tromping in creeks, I learned so much about how fish relate to current by walking through a foot-deep creek and just watching like even chubs and minnows and stuff like that and how they relate to just that little bend or that little submerged something. So that's what I really like. I like that it helps me make sense of a water system.
Yeah, I like that, man. That's a good point. And it's always changing. It's another thing I love about it because it floods and things like that. It's just always changing. What you said about it breathes life and oxygen. It's true. I mean, most all of our, especially in the, areas we live, maybe a little bit further north, you get some, obviously you get natural lakes, but most all the lakes in the country, especially these big ones, are man-made. And it's they're kind of always getting worse. I mean, they're a lot of dead water, and that's just like, they weren't meant to be there. The river, the way God intended it, was the healthiest, the most like prolific, full life with the flooding, and then the trees fall down. That gives new nutrients and just keeps on and on and on. You just don't have that on the lake anymore. And so it gets a little bit stagnant, stale. You get, they call that the trophic upsurge whenever like they flood a lake for the first time and all the nutrients, and it's great for 20 years. And all of a sudden it starts getting worse and worse and worse. And then of course it's silting itself in is what's happening. It's burying all the rocks, all the cool, surface area for all the, crustaceans and amphibians and the bait fish and everything to hide. The only thing that kind of saves it, honestly, is when they let grass grow, but not many lakes do that. You know what I mean? That can kind of bring it back and give it some health. Well, like you
then
see,
everybody freaks out and they spray it and kill all that.
And then, yeah, exactly. The only other way it kind of gets saved every once in a while, and again, is when we create an artificial ocean out of it and put like bluebacks or something like that in there. So now you got this fish that normally didn't live there. You made a fake ocean. All this open water that used to be dead is at least has food and life in it. And now the fish adapt, as you've seen on these Alabama bass lakes. Some people still call them spotted bass, but the Alabama bass are just so prolific at chasing those open water fish. But even in places like Lake Murray, where they're in there, but the largemouth have been there so long with the bluebacks, they've adapted and learned how to feed like a striped bass in just open water, like an ocean. So every once in a while, you get these weird little things where you can kind of save a lake, but it's not as healthy as a river, like you're saying, man. It's just not. It just isn't natural. Wasn't supposed to be there and made that way. So I agree. It's always changing. It's healthier. I love it, man. It's exciting stuff.
It trips me out to think of what you just said of like that all of our man-made lakes are basically, in the grand scheme of things, brand new. Like, we don't know how they're going to look or fish or healthy they're going to be in 1,000 years, 2,000 years, because man-made lakes have only been around for, I don't know, 100 years or something. Like, so we are in the baby stages of all of these lakes, and how bad are they going to be in 5 generations, 10 generations?
Very bad, I think, because unfortunately they're not going to, they're going to kill grass, because unfortunately for fishermen, obviously the purpose of the lake is, water for drinking and things like that, obviously, and then also, it's flood control, but then also electricity, like one of the main reasons they built those dams, those big lakes. So, and then after that, it's recreation for everybody else, jet skis, boats, things like that, and then us. So we're the lowest thing on the totem pole. So they're not going to get better; they're going to keep getting worse, unfortunately. Which this is why the argument for live scope, it actually helps you get more out of, get more juice out of the squeeze, because we needed it, man. They're getting worse. It's like, my God, we almost need that now to like catch some of these fish and find them. And it obviously brings us back to, then let's have bass fishing invest a little bit more and push a little further into kayak, because it can still get in these places that are going to continue to stay pretty good. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's like cities and runoff and bad things that flow into the rivers. Obviously, that gets into the lakes too, since they're made from rivers. But the rivers are going to keep having that natural trophic upsurge and trees falling down and floods, and the nutrients from the floodplain get in there and keep staying healthy. So let's keep pushing that way, because it's soccer. It's the soccer of our sport. If we can promote it, highlight it, then the whole sport will benefit. The bass boat side will benefit big time, because the only thing the companies that are investing in bass boat world fishing, the only thing that the kayak doesn't use, if you think about it, is just that fiberglass boat and the outboard. Everything else we use. So it's like, invest over here. More people we sell like 500,000 fishing kayaks a year, the industry for fishing kayaks, compared to 9,000 brand new fiberglass bass boats. So anyway, I'd say invest over there, and let's get skinny, let's get shallow, let's get all to those new creative courses that have never been exposed yet, and puzzles that have never been, a game that's never been like already filmed and we know the outcome, and let's do that, man. That's a future, because the lakes are going to keep getting worse. There's cycles for lakes. It's like the stock market or real estate. It's always going to go, like, real estate's always going to gain in value, but you're going to have years where it goes up and down, and all of a sudden, but it gradually just keeps over the course of time up. So I know people out there can say that's not true, Drew. This lake is fishing better than it ever has in like the last 10 years. That's true. You'll have some upswings. Don't get me wrong. But overall, the lakes will continue to get worse. It just know that it will. It's just facts.
All right, everybody, we'll get back to our conversation with Drew in just a second, but first, the Tackle Talk podcast is brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium Batteries. Now, no matter the situation, no matter the use, if it's trolling motors, kayak motors, electronics, whatever you need power for, the only battery that I run out there on the water is Dakota Lithium. And I'm serious when I say that over the past few years, since I've started running Dakota Lithiums, I have not had one single issue with battery power on the water ever. In fact, the only issue that I've had was when my dumb self broke the handle on my 24-volt 60-amp-hour. Totally my fault, but I called Dakota Lithium's customer service team, and they had a new handle to my doorstep in like 4 days. That US-based customer service team is no joke. But besides that customer service team, they're twice the power at half the weight. They charge up to 5 times faster, last up to 4 times longer, and they come with an 11-year warranty standard. So if you want your own Dakota Lithium batteries, all you got to do is go to www.dakotalithium.com and use code TACKLETALK5 at checkout. It saves you money. It lets them know that we sent you. It's a win-win for everybody. So again, use code TACKLETALK5, Tackle Talk, the number 5, over at www.dakotalithim.com, the official lithium battery of Bassmaster. So I think one of the things that people have trouble with when they first say, okay, I do want to get into kayak and I want to start fishing current, is just the intimidation factor of holding your position, of being safe about it, that kind of thing. How are you actually holding position in a lot of heavy current? Like, there's a couple different ways you can go about it. There's anchoring, there's your motor and pointing upstream, there's the power pole type deal. In your experience, when do you reach for one versus the others?
That's a good question. I would say that if you're using a stern-mounted motor, and the reason I got one is because the tournaments went to designated launches, and you kind of have to have one to either get away and get far enough away from people, separate yourself, because when you show up at a launch with 30 or 40 people, most kayak anglers, trust me, they're fishing, within 3 miles of that launch. So you've all probably found the same juice, and I'm like, my personality, I'm like, no, I got to get further away, because otherwise, everything that's pretty close to this ramp's kind of been found. So because of that, I tend to go upstream rivers and creeks in that stern mounted motor, whether it's a Newport, Torpedo, whatever, Bixby, whatever kinds are out there. That helps you in the current, and you can kind of hold yourself still with lithium batteries, these days being used. It doesn't take much power. You can use your feet to steer, and you just hold yourself still. So I don't really, necessarily use any type of anchor system when I'm going upstream, because I can hold my place basically if I need to. If I'm in the setup we just talked about that has those power poles, or if you happen to have a micro anchor, you can certainly save and conserve battery power and drop it, but it's always going to spin you around unless you got the duals, which I do have 2, those 4-foot Pro Series 2 blades. But yeah, I'm generally just doing that, and that's how I hold position. I also do sneaky little stuff whenever I can. This is just from, learning how to be a good paddler and how to read the river current, and things you can do with the kayak is you can always nose your kayak up on a log or a rock or anywhere and use that as a natural way to just stop yourself. And then if it's deep and there's a lot of flow and it's kind of high, then obviously can't do that. But if I'm doing a float trip without a, motor from point A to point B, even if I have a motor, I guess I could still use this. Technically, something like a drag chain could come in handy to slow yourself down. And then there's products like the Anchor Wizard and different reels. John from Yak Gadget makes one that's similar, but basically you just let out the line and a piece of chain with bike inner tube on it coming off the back. If anyone's ever fished out of any of the boats I designed, I create little drag chain chutes off the back of the shoalie that the chain can come back up and retract all the way back on the deck of the kayak, so it doesn't slow you down when you're paddling and create drag. So that's kind of nice because it ticks the bottom. You can set it about the depth of the bottom. It just kind of slows you down, or it can stop you if you let enough line out. And then if you need to move again, you could paddle and it kind of breaks free from those rocks or whatever. And then you just kind of keep ticking along, kind of like a trolling motor, keeping you at the right speed. Because if you're pulling over and eddying out all the time, you're kind of on top of where the fish are. They want to be in those, usually in those calm spots as well. So you can't just go right on top of them, but you can stay in kind of that moderate current, a little bit swifter water, and drop that drag chain, and then be able to make those casts and fish effectively. And obviously, just want to say this: if you ever make sure on your life jacket you have a knife. You never want to drop a drag chain in water that is too swift that you can't backwards paddle, because that's how you get unstuck. If it does get stuck wedged between rocks or branch or something, you just back paddle to where, wind up as much as you can, keep winding up as you back paddle, and then as soon as you get the opposite direction, it'll pop out usually. So, but that's the little rule of thumb: never drop it in water that's so swift that you can't backwards paddle. Because if you do, you're going to sit there and sway like crazy back and forth, and the stern's going to go under. You might flip out. So if you have a knife handy, you can just cut it right there. And the shoalie has the line runs on that outside of the kayak where you reel. You could easily just grab it, pull it up, and cut it. It's not internal, which is, I think, is a little bit dangerous for any kayak that has their anchor lines internal, because you can't easily grab it and cut them. So.
Yeah, that was we did a couple weeks ago from when this comes out. We did a review on the NK180, and one of the things I said was the NK180, just in general, a rear mounted motor was one of the best things I ever bought specifically for this situation. There is no substitute for being able to set that motor the exact same speed as that current, and like you said, sit in your seat, use your feet, hands free, and basically you have spot lock in the current, where you're not moving at all. Because the other thing too is you want to make sure that you have the foot steering to be able to just micro adjustments to keep yourself completely straight, and you can fish that current seam that you would have never been able to hold your spot and fish. I also am kind of like you. I hate using anchors in the current. I've had a couple bad situations where I was an idiot, dropped an anchor in way too fast a current. It got caught, and you're doing the whole thing of trying to get it, and your kayak's tipping and you're about to flip out, and it's it's just not worth it. So that motor was one of the best things I ever bought for all the people that are like, oh, I don't need a motor on my kayak. That takes away all the kayak and exercise part of it. It's like, if you really want to go die hard and fish these really hard to fish spots that are maybe the fishiest location on your river, like that heavy current with that great seam and that eddy off to the right or to the left, you want to be able to hold that perfect position so you can make those casts. So the next question I want to ask you is those casts. So there are certain situations, at least for me, I know that I like to cast straight up current and come straight back down. There's also situations I like to go a little bit more diagonal. There's certain situations I like to go straight across. How do you decide where you want to position your kayak in the current to make those casts?
Yeah, that's a good one. So basically you want most of my casts are actual like visual targets or somewhere that in my head it's so shallow I can imagine, pretend that there's a fish behind it. And you just hit as many as you can. It could be, a undercut root bank or logs or whatever, like rocks, obviously, stuff like that. Then there's other situations where I am just fan casting a boulder field that's an underwater boulder field or a flat, just searching for them, right? But so what I like to do is I always tell people, like, take advantage of what the kayak affords you to do, even on a lake. But so what I mean is so get your kayak as close to the bank if you're going up the river, let's say. And I always fish the right side of the river going upstream because I'm left-handed. So my cast goes across the open side,
so
the middle of the river. Yeah. So you always want to do that, and you get the best skip cast to get underneath there, and then you can take your rod and kind of obviously bring it over and hold it against the bank and near the bank where your bait parallels that structure on the bank that you're fishing. So I always say parallel all the structure and have your bait go as close to it as possible, because my strategy, my theory, my philosophy on keeping it simple and one reason I think I've done so well in these tournaments is literally I think that the way to fool big fish is to force them to react. It's just force them to react. And they're not going to react if you don't make a good, accurate cast and run that bait, a foot, maybe 2 foot max, right by that piece of structure they're ambushing behind. They have time to see it and a little bit better as they're going towards it and realize the human flaws in it and that the non-natural pieces of it. But man, when I do this like this, Andrew, it's funny. If you were here in person, if you guys all listening were here in person in a chair, I would probably take a water bottle and just throw it at somebody randomly right now, and they would catch it. And I would say, oh, it's funny how you caught that. You reacted. And a bass, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to get them to react and get the most. So basically, you got to just position your kayak and I actually hold my paddle on my lap most of the time, where I can do a draw stroke and even because a motor can't do everything. It can't bring your kayak completely 90 degrees to the right or the left. It can go forward and move to the right or the left, but it can't go completely to the right or the left on its own. You're gonna have to move forward, and sometimes I don't want to go forward. And I just, those little nuances and subtle things, and on the lakes, it's these little things like that can help you get the cast into the docks or take advantage of the kayak being the kayak in the sense that get because most bass boats, especially if there's 2 people in it, they don't want to front end the back angler. So most bass boats go around the lake at a cast distance away from the bank, and they cast to the bank and pull it away, which is, completely wrong thing to do. If you're fishing bank structure, you want to be on that bank, which most pros that don't have co-anglers, you'll see that's what they do. They get on the bank, they run it, Stephen Brown and whoever, just ripping a chatterbait down that bank fast as possible, right? So that's what you want. So take advantage of what makes the kayak, and just get yourself in position to make sure your bait can get as close to it, if not knock it, as possible. And again, on lakes, it's like under dock walkways and the places in the cast between docks and low bridges and anywhere, culvert pipes that you can get. But yeah, that's how I do it. I just kind of position myself like that. And going upstream, what we talked about with the motor in these situations can be nice to hold yourself and just take your time getting that right position. And most of the currents going, because I want to say up current, not most fish are looking like up current, which doesn't mean upstream.
Correct. Yeah.
People do
Big
forget
difference.
that currents swirl in different directions. And a lot of times in the summer when there's hardly any current, they don't really sit. They're not like trout and salmon. You have this picture in your head of fish, and people always say, to kind of get back to another part of your question, do you throw upstream or across stream or downstream? And it also depends on the lure, like a buzz bait or spinner bait or crankbait or whatever. Certain baits don't really work that good if you throw upstream and bring them down with the current, especially if it's swift current, because you need the opposite force to make that blade work on a chatterbait or a spinnerbait or a buzzbait, whatever, or your swim bait boot tail to kick properly. So for those baits, you're getting your boat in more position to make a more of a cross current presentation or even an upstream presentation for a buzzbait. Certain baits actually work better even going back upstream or up current, whatever. So just pay attention to what the currents are doing. And people, I don't get too caught up in, a lot of people do get caught up in that whole, like, you got to throw upstream, bring the bait back down naturally. And I always, in seminar that I do, I always joke and say, raise your hand if you've ever seen a bluegill, a shad, any fish in the water, a creek chub, anything you ever seen any of them swim downstream and upstream, side stream, any direction? Everyone's like, yeah, they swim all different directions. I'm like, exactly. Fish, the bait that the bass are eating, swim in every different direction. So, and the beauty is, the bass can see. People don't really realize this, but their eyes bug out of their head, and they've done studies. They can see in 350-degree radius. So do you think it really matters if it doesn't even matter if a fish is facing the complete opposite direction of your bait and you bring it back up behind his tail, because they can see that? There's only one little 10% area they can't see. I don't know if you know where it is. Do you have any idea?
I'm going to guess it's probably directly in front of him, like straight ahead. Yeah. Straight
ahead. And it's actually just like a little short distance, like 6 inches or something. I don't know. And that's why they when you're bed fishing, if you ever see them back up, that's why they can't see it. If it's right in front of their nose, they can't see it. That's like the only spot they can't see it, because they can see it, because you got to think about it, their body is the length of their body, more of it's behind them. So they can see, they can't see the top of their dorsal fin right behind their eyes very well, probably also, but your bait's at that point, you're literally hitting the fish. So if you're bringing it up behind them, they're going to see that, and then they're going to turn. And you'll notice when you're target fishing, like we're talking about, like these visual targets, especially current, most of the time shallow, they hit, if you go watch any of my videos, they hit usually in the first few cranks, the first quarter of your cast, or when you go right by that piece of structure, that tells you right there, like, every one of these fish weren't facing exactly perfectly where your lure was. They heard it. They felt it. They heard it. They sensed it. They saw it, obviously in clear water with that 350-degree radius. And that just shows you how fast they are. If you bring it close enough to them, like, they want it. So that's kind of my theory and philosophy. Just keep hitting as many of those as possible and force them to, because they don't have hands. They can't catch that water bottle I throw at the people in the crowd, but they have a mouth. That's the only way they can grab something. And when I was a kid, we actually ate our fish. My parents just grew up fishing with their parents, and for food, like on the Sabine River in Texas and Toledo Bend, where one set of my grandparents retired on Toledo Bend. And when I would clean fish with my dad as a kid, I'd see many times, I remember a stick being in the stomach. And I guarantee you that was a fish that just reacted on a stick that fell. And there were other bass near that bass, and they ate it because they didn't want the other ones to get the food, and they never spit it out, and they swallowed it. And I guess it passed. It was eventually going to pass, I guess. But that's all they got. They don't have hands. That's all they got. So, but they just don't know that you've got hooks on yours. So make them react, and you're going to hopefully trick some big ones.
That's interesting to think about, like, because if you want to back up for a couple minutes ago, you were talking about, obviously, like those big mature fish, it is just a reaction game of just trying to appeal to the primal instincts of that fish to, boom, at least give you something right off the bat. And there might be something to be said for hitting that fish from a different angle, because like you said, if you're hitting it from, 5 o'clock behind it, and it sees something and it flashes and it turns around to investigate, you've already won half the reaction battle. You've already started that, whatever that thing is in their brain, to say reaction. Now the next step is they're probably not going to completely whip around, react, and then stop on a dime and try and inspect this thing that's moving at Mach 10. Like, they're just going at it. So there might be something to be said for not hitting them straight on. The other thing,
that's very true.
You want to talk about like swirling currents and stuff. One of the things that I learned a long time ago was, obviously, when you have those swirling eddies and stuff, one of the sneakiest bites you can get on is going to the top top of, so like if you've got, let's say for real easy sake, you've got a dam, and a low head's coming over, and then it's got the swirling eddy on the right side. Before you go over that dam, if you're coming from like above, you walk over to that side and you fish the current that's coming toward the dam on the back swing of that swirl. And there are fish that sit there too, because that's another spot when option one is taken, which is right at the calm water of everything coming over the dam, the seconds and thirds are getting picked off by these fish that are sitting on the back end of that swirl.
That's so true. And your alpha fish you'll if you fish rivers and current enough, you will start to learn the like prime spots, and the alphas will like own them. They'll push out the other smaller fish, and then you can kind of start. That's why I kind of said in a tournament mindset, I'm actually moving. Yeah, I can just keep going down the river and catching fish all day long, but I'm looking for big fish. So you start to kind of pattern where these alpha fish would live. And you're right. And there's even some little like sneaky spots like the backside of those currents and places like that hold big ones as well. So and then we definitely should at least touch on, we've talked a lot about visual targets, the fact that there are underwater targets in structure all in rivers that is not visible. And I usually show some videos of the better you get at reading current and the better paddler you become, and the more you can read current, the better your mindset. It really is like a whitewater kayak, or being able to see every piece of current and swirl on the surface is telling you something about under the surface. And you can see if you got this nice, calm, moderate flow, a little laminar flow, and all of a sudden you see a little consistent riffle in this one spot. Something is down there, a boulder, a log, as you know, root ball. And most anglers, again, I'm talking like tournament stuff, are going to miss that. They're going to miss it. I throw at it, and then every once in a while you get exploded on by a good fish, and then later after you catch a fish, you go look, and it was like, oh wow, there's a tree that was down there. I didn't know it, but I saw that, like that rolling boil that was there, and I caught that fish in it. And that's it's a little extra fish here and there. It's like, think about any pro sport that winning is like, I know our sport literally is measured in inches, but it is like just microscopic, man. So you got to take advantage of all. And even if you're fun fishing and you're listening to this, you're just a fun fisherman, why do you not, of course, want to catch more fish when you're out there? So it helps everybody. But Olympic swimmers at one point shaved all their body hair to save 0.2 of a second. Someone realized, hey, this is going to save me a little time from the friction that my hair is. And then now, of course, they wear like those suits. But someone had to figure that out. And that's my mindset when it comes to fishing, whether I'm fun fishing or tournament, because I want to catch as many and as big fish as possible. So little things like that, and this laminar medium level flow are places that don't have obvious stuff sticking up, are places that people like miss, or a lot of smallmouth, and there's a lot of flats that they'll use certain times of the year around the spawn, when they actually spawn over there in those kind of flats, that people like. You have the slow deep pools, right? And then you've got the shallow water that's actually like super shallow, and riffles and rapids, stuff like that. But then you've got this, imagine a slow, deep pool, but in the middle of that pool, it goes from like 8 foot down to like 2. And all of a sudden, if you see leaves in the other parts that are 8 foot, they're not even moving. You can't even tell you're in a river. It's just still. But all of a sudden, when you get to that part where it's like 2 foot, you see it moving. And what this is, I think people that fish lakes will understand this. A bridge, you can see the current kind of moving in a bridge in a lake. It's a pinch point, and all the water from that lake is, of course, funneling its way to the dam and through the dam back down the river, right? So those bridges, you kind of understand they're a natural pinch point this direction. Well, people forget about on rivers, their current will happen when there's a pinch point the opposite direction, with depth being shallower. So when you find little sneaky spots like that don't have any visible stuff, and maybe there's some boulders under there, of course, that it's shallower, so there's going to be something on the riverbed, right? But they like that stuff, and you can fan cast topwater baits, buzz baits. I know you got a great buzz bait that you throw all the time. That mini one with is a jig master, right?
Yeah.
That one. Your choppos, your spooks, stuff like that are awesome for searching. And the only thing I will say, it's another good little tip to remember every day when you go out, guys. The water clarity, kind of take every piece of this information in, and because when you make a bad cast on a root ball or something, and let's say it's, 5-6 feet away from where you really wanted it for that reaction, but a fish still hits it, and it hits it from the direction where it was pretty obvious it was coming from that. Well, you've learned something. That fish just saw your bait and was able to react on it 6 feet away from that route. Well, don't just do nothing with that information. When you're fan casting that laminar flow section with the or underwater boulder field or anywhere else, don't be a moron and make casts every like 3 or 4 feet apart when you're fan casting like a clock, right? Now you know a fish can see your bait, not 6 feet, but 12 feet. Because it's obviously either side of that, he could see it on either side of that root ball. He could have gone either direction if he heard and saw your bait. At minimum, you can make your cast 12 feet apart as you're fan casting. So never make the same cast twice when you're doing fishing like this and save time. Because I've learned before, like when it's super clear, dude, I can throw a cast like, 12 o'clock and then like 1:30 and then go to 3, like literally super wide, knowing that fish at either side that are seeing my bait from 15 feet away could hit it. And, it's like we said earlier, it's not always this perfect reaction against a piece of structure, because right there, you don't know where the structure is. You're just hoping that when they do see it, they come and maybe there's other fish in the area and they're competitive and they hit it, they still smash it, just like you running it past a visible boulder or log or root ball or whatever. So, and obviously once you find them, then where some are, and there's typically more in that zone, because bass do love to kind of hang together and they're there for a reason: food, the right current. In the summer, that laminar flow is huge, because when they open their mouths and they are kind of probably facing upstream in those areas or up current, I feel like it's got to be how you and I feel a fan feels to us in the middle of summer when it's 95 degrees and we got a fan, some wind on us. It feels great. And they love that with oxygen, better oxygen. So those areas are pretty key in the summer and fall. And I look for those, and they're just not obvious at all.
I love that. People need to clip that last section you just talked about, because what you just talked about, the analytical part of this, of saying root ball right here, I made a 6-foot cast over here, fish sees it, now I have this 12-foot piece of the pie that I can play with. You improved your efficiency by like 3x just from that one fish catch, and now who knows how much time that saves you the rest of the day, how much more efficient you can be. That's the kind of stuff that makes a great angler. That's the stuff that helps you pick apart this vast array of area you're trying to cover, and the name of the game is how efficiently can you do it, and little pieces of the puzzle like that make a big difference. The other thing, like there's other things that were just hidden in there like Easter eggs, like the alpha fish, right? I subscribe to this theory that alpha fish, especially river smallmouth, if that fish is not hitting and I make that perfect cast of where I'm targeting in the first 2 or 3 casts, I'm moving on. Those fish do not sit there and watch the perfect opportunity go by 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Like you said, they're hitting it within 10 seconds of it hitting the water. Like they're there. That's their territory. They're protective. They are the alpha that has picked out that spot, and they're holding it, for themselves. Like you're not sitting there for 45 minutes trying to coax this current fish into eating. They will do it if you're in the right spot.
It's so true, man. I don't waste that time. People are going to listen to this, and somebody out there is going to say, well, I remember one time because I reel my bait in. Once it gets past those obvious, visible pieces of structure, if that's efficient, it's coming back in as fast as possible and on to the next one, right? Because if they were there, they would have hit it, like you said. Somebody out there is going to say, well, I caught a fish one time right at the boat and blah, blah, blah. And obviously, if it's murkier water and stuff like that, you're going to go slower. You're going to give it a little bit longer, stuff like that. But once it's clear, man, it's back in fast. And because you might say, yeah, I caught one big fish one time, right? Near the boat and all that. But that one random time you did that, I've already moved on to and made
it's a numbers
so many
game.
More casts, so many fishing. I've caught, way more fish than you have, because you're not going to hit. Because other people are going to say, well, I also slowed down in one hole, and it took me like 30 minutes, and I threw out who knows how many casts in 30 minutes fishing a Ned rig or some crawfish on the bottom or something, and I caught this big fish. Well, dude, by the time you're doing that, I hit so many more things, and I caught so many other big fish. So I still, it's all about time and efficiencies. Just like you said, that's it for fishing, a numbers game. It really is, with this style and this strategy.
So what about times of year that you're targeting current? Because I think that makes a big difference for me around here in terms of when I gravitate toward the heaviest flow areas of the river versus when I shy away from them when it comes to like winter, spring, summer, fall. What about you? When do you tend to gravitate toward the heaviest current, and when do you tend to kind of back off of it?
I mean, you kind of you got to go when you can go, right, for fishing. And so obviously sometimes the river's going to be up and down, and then the heaviest current, I feel like they want to be, a lot of those alpha fish do want to be near the heaviest current. So even if it's the fall or the summer and you get some rise, then like you're saying, that dam or whatever, that primo spot with that, like, that white water sitting right there in the very front, they're going to kind of own those places. And if it's a plunge pool or by some rapids or whatever, that it doesn't matter what time matter of fact, when I was on the Susquehanna River fishing the Bassmaster Kayak Series this year, I finished like an inch and a half off the wind, but I finished in 7th. I mean, it's right there. And my second day, my motor broke. I had fishing line wrapped up in it, unfortunately, and it broke. So I didn't have it. And I floated myself down to these rapids that I didn't fish pre-fishing, didn't really think much about them, because that's typically where they spawn in the spring. They go into these, they have this kind of seasonal pattern move where they winter in those deep pools a little bit, those deeper kind of pools, slower moving water, but they'll still be kind of near some of that current, but they'll be the first part that gets deeper and kind of, but then they start moving their way up into those shoals and the riffles and the shallower water as the spring kind of, but they're at the base. They're usually at the base of that rapid. Then they move up kind of like up into those shoals and rapids and the little pools and places they can get into once the metabolisms get high enough, and because the water gets warm enough, and they can get in there and start feeding on all the stuff they couldn't feed on in all winter because their metabolisms weren't going enough to go up rapids. You know what I mean? They're just cold blooded. That's not the way they're gonna work. And all those prey had been sitting there growing and getting, proliferating all winter long. So they haven't been fed on for a while. So it's perfect. It's like this natural balance of like nothing preyed on all those crustaceans and everything in there, and they hammer them, and then they spawn there, and then they kind of near there, and the shoal bass especially in the actual shoal, smallmouth will too, but in the flats, and then they go almost back in the summer. They got to spread out everywhere again a little bit, but if there's a rain, so get back to my Susquehanna River tournament in the summer, and the water got up, I got to these rapids, and I'm like, it's kind of a springtime spot, so I guess, but I'll still throw my, it's murky water, so let me throw my white chartreuse chatterbait with a white trailer up in there and see what happens. All of a sudden, bam, 19 something. I'm like, oh, dude, I forget that once the water gets up, they're just, oh, wow, we can get up into these shallower, swifter stuff that we normally don't feel safe feeding on because there's bald eagles and other things that will eat them, and they don't want to be that visible in the clear water that typically in the summer and fall shallow. So it's really kind of what the water's, like we said at the beginning of this whole thing, the current just positions them. So if there's not much current flow in the summer, those riffles and shallow areas, there's not as strong. They'll tend to be in that, like they'll be right above those riffles. They love that, what I call the push water, like right above a riffle, and they'll still be right below them too in the pool there as well. But then, like I said, they spread out into other areas and those laminar flow sections and stuff like that. So you just kind of have to fish the moment every time. It's like, it just whatever you got, you kind of got, but they're always going to relate to that current. And if you can find that swifter, gnarly stuff, then there's going to be somebody home, I'm sure.
My whole life, I have, until maybe 2 years ago, I had a buddy here that finally got me hip to it, of really keying in on the area right, like you're talking about, above the riffle. Like you call it a tail out, call it whatever, like right before.
Yeah. Because
what's happening is that water is starting to get sucked harder right there in anticipation of the riffle coming up. So there is this pre-current almost that's up there that's always churning as well. It's not as visible. You don't see it as much. It looks like a do-nothing area above that, fall or that riffle or whatever. But that area right up there too, those fish will sit right just as equally as they will nose up to the current below wherever the fall is. They'll do the same thing above it, and they'll just sit up there and be like, this is that last sort of like flush of the toilet water almost before it goes down the chute. And you're like, I can catch plenty of bait right here too.
That's true. And actually, if you measure the speed of that current and you put like a leaf down and saw it move, it's very similar to what I'm talking about, laminar flow. It's out. It could be in the middle of a pool that's slower, and all of a sudden it gets shallower. It's like 8 foot to 2 or 1, and it's shallower. And then all of a sudden you see it moving at this like nice, Jeff Little and I call it this laminar flow speed in that push water is the same sort of like, it just starts picking up a little bit, and they just love it. And the reason I think they love it in the summer, we're getting so deep into this and I love it, man, is because So those fish that are in that laminar flow are are feeding a lot of times on insects, because that laminar, that push water is very calm and flat before it rolls over. And because there's no turbulence on the surface, they can see really well, like above the water. And they hammer insects a lot. In any calm in the middle of the Susquehanna River, if you see any big calm areas in between, like, it's a very wide river, so it gets a lot of wind. But if you get some islands that break it up, and then all of a sudden there's a lot of rocks everywhere, but then you got this kind of slower section that's calm. I've seen them stacked up as many as like 100 smallmouth, and it's not a deep pool. It's not insanely shallow, but it might be like 3-4 feet, but it's just calm. And they want that in a certain couple months of the summer when they're just like keying in on insects, because it's this crazy cycle. It's like we said, okay, we've eaten all the crustaceans in the shoals or whatever. We've eaten the bait fish in the early spring when they were migrating up to the base of rapids and stuff, and they were trying to do their angel spawns like shad and stuff too. They've munched on the bait fish, and then they've munched on the crustaceans once the water clears up a little bit better. And then they hammer the bluegill when they spawn. Then they go to the insects. It's crazy, this like consistent like pattern of what they kind of move to. It's wild, man. It's a lot of fun to kind of track it. And it's why we love this sport, man. It's a mystery.
So I know you're a big like map study guy too. Like when you're going to a new place, like I've seen your videos, all that, where you go and you pick apart before you even step foot in these places. Like you can do this stuff from your couch at this point. Google Earth, Google Maps, they all exist. It's all public, and you'd be silly not to use these tools to almost not pre-fish, but, you know, do a lot of the groundwork in before you even get to the body of water. You know, a question we get asked all the time, and I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on this, and it's a very wide open question, but what are you looking for? Like, what are the top things? I know that every body of water has its nuances, but, you know, in terms of dams, bends, overhanging trees and tree lines, depth changes that you can see on Google Maps and things like that, riffles, like what are you actually looking for?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And what I'm looking for, and again, going back to like Google Earth Pro, you can use the history and see historical satellite images, which brings me back to my original point. We kicked this podcast off with information in general, not like just LiveScope, in general, like this is what has made everybody so much better and at catching these fish. And so we have it now. We got all this stuff. So what I look for is, especially on like tournaments are a little bit different, because you got to also be kind of out thinking the competition. Where are they going to be? Where does everyone else going to be? Where's the majority of your field going to fish? Because an A spot in a tournament that everyone knows about turns out to be a B or C spot when you actually try to fish it in a tournament, because it gets split up and cannibalized. So you actually have to find like this sneaky B kind of spot that really no one else is going to be at, and then it turns into be an A spot for the tournament because no one else was there, and you got everything out of it as long as you execute it. So what I'm looking for in like these creeks and rivers are that take the historical satellite image down to the lowest point, and you can see, you need to make sure. So like, you know how they always say a fish can get as big as the aquarium, right?
Yeah.
And so an ocean is giant, and obviously a creek's pretty small, but your pools at the lowest point in the summer and the fall, when you can get your satellite image down, that is actually what I always feel like is the true size of that aquarium, because they always have to be able to survive every month of the year. So look at it at the lowest level, and then realize if there are no real deep holes and there isn't enough water there's a point where a creek gets so small it becomes a nursery for bass. You catch small bass all day long, little ones, but you're never going to catch winning tournament fish. But then there's a point where it's so big, bass boats are all over it. It's just like, and that can, you can still win there and it still works. But I kind of looking for these like small, medium to small size places that still have enough water at that lowest satellite image where I'm like, okay, a fish doesn't need to leave there at any point. It can live there year round. It can survive. And then another little cool tip, since we're giving away all the juice here in the show, if you ever go explore those creeks like you did when you were a kid, I'm sure if you flip over logs and rocks, you'll notice the difference. There's more aquatic life and vegetation and insects and things on the wood as opposed to the rocks. There's just rocks are just a rock. There's not like a lot of nutrients. The wood actually is a decaying nutrient. So I do look for a lot of the best creeks and places and stretches of river where I can see there's been a lot of wood that is fallen, right? And it's consistently falling on those outside bends or whatever, rapids and places that I think people may not want to go to just because they might not have the skill set to paddle or maneuver and work there like I do. It's kind of how I won that Bassmaster Championship, getting up the Illinois River for Lake Tenkiller in some places. Didn't have like giant rapids, but it was just harder to get to. And my kayak setup, I dialed it in where I could go, because you can't get out of your kayak. And that one of the rules for the Kayak Adventure series, you can, and you can even wade fish if you're tethered. But for Bassmaster and Hobie and other series, you can't. So I had to dial in that setup where I, could still, between motoring and paddling, I get up there. So look for places like that. Anything that would like deter other people, a tough access, in this most recent event I fished, if you go watch the video walkthrough I did for that power pole setup, I had some clips from the Bassmaster event in Shreveport, Lake Bistineau, Lake Caddo. I was fishing Lake Bistineau, and I actually went so skinny and so shallow that there was a big bass boat tournament that day, and the lake is drawn down for the fall. They draw down like 7 or 8 feet to kill off that floating Sylvania. So it's like it sucks the whole lake down like a ton. It's not a very deep lake to begin with, so the fish are like, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. But everybody gets that same opportunity. The bass boats, everybody. There's only so many places you can fish it, make the lake so much smaller. But I just went up to where it's skinny and shallower that they will never go. And then once you get through some of that stuff, it gets deeper and you find some deeper holes. Another thing to think about is vegetation. If there's vegetation that will stop most kayak anglers with pedal drives or other setups that are so big and heavy, or bass boats, I love to go there and explore. It's not always a hit. Most all the wild places I go explore typically aren't, that doesn't mean you're just naturally, if no one else can get there, just magically, there's just all these fish that are going to win the tournament. Unfortunately, I wish it was that way. It's just not true. But those are the things I look for, is like little places that you could just barely sneak through or get through with the width of my kayak or the depth that it drafts in. And then I just go explore them. And then you got to, boots on the ground. And an interesting thing that I've never said publicly, but I think I'm going to try to do next year, like you, I got a family, man. I've got wife, kids, 2 kids, dog, 3 dogs, got a lot going on. Running this Kayak Adventure series, I want to still compete because I feel like I'm still competing at a high level. I mean, like I won the AOI in 2022 in Bassmaster. Then the year after I was 4th. And then this last year I was 6th. And I'm fishing the minimum. If you go look at the standings, they show how many events people are fishing. I'm fishing the minimum number of events you could fish. So I'm not even giving myself a mulligan or 2, a throwaway event. So I'm still able to compete at a high level, but I do want to spend more time and not miss out on everything that's awesome about my kids at 3 years old almost now, and then 6.5. So next year, since I have a lot going on, I'm going to try, I might make it like a series on YouTube or something, because I don't fish as many events now that I'm running my own series. I might fish like 4 or 5 events next year, which the Bassmaster Kayak Series is 5 events. And then the championship, which is this year I fished 4. I fished the championship, the one that I won, and then the other 3. And, which is the minimum for AOI points. The other 3 that you get AOI points for, 3 of the 5. So I'm going to do this, man. Here's what I'm thinking. Tell me if you think this is crazy or not. But I'm going to try to do it with no pre-fishing at any of them, practice, and just showing people how map study. It's a 2-day tournament, so I just need to get right. And by the end of that first day, I just need to stay in it. And then then I feel like I know what's going on and can figure it out on the day of. So I'm thinking about leaving where I can, if I do leave on let's say Thursday, and I can get to that location, or even Friday morning, and just go, and maybe I have a half day to just drive around, check some water temperatures, stuff like that. I have a digital meat thermometer type thing that I just take and put into the creeks and rivers and drive around all the bridges. And I do it's my like pre-fishing. I cover the whole lake and kind of try to see it all, river, all the creeks and everything, feeding it, so I can see like water clarity and stuff like that for all the different tributaries, the temperature, clarity, the health of it, right? I assess it all. And I might have time to just basically do that, maybe make a few casts from the bank, but basically just give myself like at most a few hours to be on the water, but basically just go cold turkey. And that'll give me more time with the family and help prove and show people like that it's more about this stuff. Like you're saying, this research, you can learn so much before you get there and already have the information you need, and just go and then just fish the moment and take your, like we were saying about that 6 foot and 6 foot, that 12-foot thing. At that point, you're just learning it from every fish catch and everything you see in the water. Even if you're standing up and a fish spooks away from you, how far did that fish how far were you from that fish when it spooked? Well, okay. They can sense you and see you from, 30 feet away or whatever, or 20 feet away. And now you kind of learn something. Obviously you're a bigger object, but so and then just roll with it and just seeing how good I can do with that. That'd be kind of cool, a little cool.
If you do well too, everybody be lining up to take your map study courses. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
That is cool though. I mean, you're right. Like information is key. Information in fishing is the jump shot in basketball. It's like it is your skill set, right? If you have the information, we saw it. You want to come full circle to like the St. Lawrence River Elite Series event this year. It was won basically on a spot. Robert Chee was on a spot that Jody had fished before, that the Johnsons had fished before, that was a spot that people knew about because of past events and information that had been made public. Like that's how you are successful nowadays. And now everybody is so good because there's 20 bajillion hours of information on YouTube. There's, a bajillion pages of blog posts and, message boards and articles and everything at your fingertips for free right now if you just start typing on your computer. We've never lived in a time like this in your life where you have this much information that I can find in half a second by hitting a button.
Yeah, and this is one of those podcasts that gives some of the best, man. You go back and listen to all your stuff and all the guests you've had. I mean, seriously, you listen to all these and you'll just be so far ahead of the game that anyone 30, 40 years ago when they didn't have this ever, it just took them so long to learn all this. So we gotta fix and solve that. And I feel like the way and the format, what we're doing it, we're just going to all these new places with the Kayak Adventure Series and the kayak in general. It's our way to still grow the sport and not cap us, man. Kind of, again, bringing it full circle to our first topic. It really is. And it's not a slight on the bass boat or any stuff that's cool about that. And it's a great tool and continue to be awesome. But man, we can help the whole industry of bass fishing if we just invest a little more over here. I think, I don't know, man. One day we'll get there and they'll kind of, I think, realize it and see it. Not that they don't. No one like Bassmaster has a kayak series for a reason, and they're pushing there, but we can do more. I think to further the non-endemics can wake up and hopefully realize that hopefully Toyota and people are like, hey, you can. Wow, we put a truck. These trucks, we use our trucks more than the elite anglers. We actually use them even in 4-wheel drive to go down these dirt roads and gravel roads to find our accesses and explore and like I said, go see, put eyes on the water and test the temperatures of the creek and put in
real truck things.
We actually are using real truck things. Yeah. Not just driving them and keeping them all pretty and clean. And but then at the same time, even in our tournaments, you could unload and move throughout the day, which I do often. I always give myself a plan B, C, and D where I can move quickly to other places, which I mean, load the kayak back on the truck, drive to, 20, 30 minutes down the road. I mean, I've driven as much as an hour and almost an hour and a half one time on Lake Champlain from the north end to the south end. But granted, I already had 94 inches when I did that. So it was okay, using it as a little bit of practice time and gamble. But if our truck doesn't work, getting us on the interstate, 8, 9 hours or whatever to our locations, and during the tournament to get us, it's our outboard. It's our Tacoma outboard is what I call my truck. We don't win the same way they credit their Yamaha or the Mercury or whatever. It's literally that important. So I don't know why we shouldn't start getting some of these non-endemics to realize that and see it. You bring in the tire companies, you bring in all this other stuff. And it's just an exciting, again, going back to that TV product. It's it's not a knock on the bass. It's just a little bit more exciting TV product. And again, we have to film it ourselves because you can't have a second camera guy on a kayak and you can't follow all the kayak anglers in a bass boat because we go places that they can't, but it's not hard to film. It's getting so easy to film with these cameras, Yak Attack, making the camera mounts and other companies out there. It's super easy. The GoPro, you just tap it or even talk to it these days. You hardwire it, just put those little battery packs that are the size of your phone just in there. It runs all day, 256 card. It's not even that hard, guys. And then boom, I think it's a more visually exciting sport to watch. And it wouldn't be cool. Isn't just cool to see the dichotomy of a TV kind of product where one guy might be live scoping and using that technology and that's the way he's kind of skinning the cat. And then they pan over to another guy who's super skinny and shallow and doing, lily pad stuff. And another guy's up a river and creek. It's, this guy's in a backwater oxbow. This guy's underneath docks, getting those cool cast angles we were talking about. again, it's like, it's a run, it's a pass, it's a tight end, it's an end around, it's a field goal, it's a safety. There's all these different ways to score. Whereas now, again, we're kind of stuck to almost every tournament's a run, and it's on the same course we've already seen, the same stuff like you said. It's just not as, but we'll get there, and I think they'll see it eventually. But I'm almost getting like tired. I don't want to ever sound like the old man, get off my lawn, and just some, kind of jaded and you like Randy Blocky gets a little bit sometimes. He's got a lot of good points too that he makes, but sometimes you kind of sense that a little bit like a little bit jaded, a little bit like get off my lawn sort of thing. I'm not saying we shouldn't progress and move forward, but at some point we got to, golf's rolling back the golf ball for a reason. Even they realize that the original intent of the sport is no longer intact, to strategically have to play around all those, obstacles. And one thing I've always thought about is if it was 1986 right now or whatever, and Ray Scott still around, and someone had just invented live scope right then, would they have allowed it? He literally would have looked at you and said, okay, like, are you, what? The whole point of the sport is that you use your instinct and what you've learned to figure out where they are, not just see them. And again, I don't have anything wrong with it. It's just, we need to make sure the other stuff gets back into play, man. All the other stuff that lets the shallow anglers and lets the TV product be able to go to both and not know how it's always going to get one. I think got to get back to that, man.
Well, and I think I don't know how to explain this, I guess. If the TV product of kayak fishing caught up to the TV product of bass boat fishing, people are going to watch what appeals to them more, like of what they do. So like we saw that with bass fishing on the boat side. I think a lot of people stayed and watched a lot more bass versus MLF because they're looking at it and saying, that's the format I do on the weekends. That's what I do on my Tuesday nights. I'm still doing that 5-fish format. Mm-hmm. I want to watch what I do. Like with basketball or whatever, you're all playing the same sport. There's not that many deviations of it. So you're watching Steph Curry play because that's how, I want to be like him when I'm in my driveway or whatever. So you're watching what you do and the way that you partake in the activity. So if you all, if we wiped the slate clean and there was the exact same product for boat fishing and kayak fishing, I would probably choose to watch the kayak fishing because it appeals to me more and I can pick up more by watching those guys and girls than I would on the boat side. So
it's true.
Yeah, it's just we watch the boat side because it's all we have at this point. Yeah. It would be interesting, like I said, snap your fingers in 25 years. Is there high quality, kayak fishing content out there that we choose to watch? A lot of people are going to gravitate toward that because it's what they do.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like lacrosse. It gets the most, it's like places like that get the best views because most people don't have live scope. I mean, even though a lot of people have it now, but most people don't. They still don't, that watch the Bassmaster. But what do? They go out and they just fish the structure and topwater, all that shallow fun stuff that you see at lacrosse. Like that's what I do. So that always gets like the highest views. It's the most entertaining. But I do like the invention. I think it's cool. It lets us catch more fish in all these lakes that are getting worse and worse. And more fish catches is good for viewership as well for TV products. So we got to have that balance in there, I think, and just find it perfectly. And I think Bass is on it. They're doing a good job, and Major League Fishing as well. They're trying to navigate through it. It's all new. So you got to give them some time to not just react and knee jerk. They got to figure some stuff out. And I think their schedule next year and the time of year they're going, they're trying to get it where not every event is, they want it to not be so predictable. You know what I mean? As well. But I just wish they would bring that shallow water stuff back. Let's see Mark Menendez going underneath some bridge with a small 16-footer again, like Dardanelle or wherever he did that and stuff like that. This creative, cool stuff that you and I love to do. And that's why we're in kayaks, I guess. So.
Well, as we start to wrap up here, I have one more topic I want to hit with you. I've got a hand-picked mailbag question here that was written into the mailbag powered by Dakota Lithium. You can use code TackleTalk5 over at DakotaLithium.com. This came in August 23rd, and this is from Nathaniel. And I pulled this question for today's episode. I think it probably fits perfectly. One, this is Tackle Talk. We weren't going to let you get away without talking some tackle here today. So this question is from Nathaniel, and he says, "Hey, Andrew, I know you and your buddies are self-proclaimed river rats, and I'm just making the jump to fishing more rivers after moving from being more of an inland lake guy my whole life. What do I need to make sure to have in my tackle box as I begin to make this change to more moving water? Thanks, Nathaniel." I think that's a fun way to kind of end this is let's go down the tackle side really fast. When you're fishing heavy current, what are some of your favorite tactics to utilize?
I would say, I mean, I'm going to give you more than just one, because it's the obvious answer is the chatterbait. It just is, because it works really good in heavy current. It thumps and works where, if you're coming downstream on a spinnerbait, it's a little harder to get to work. You got to work it faster. Chatterbait just seems to pick up and work. It gets under, it sinks a little bit. The spinnerbait wants to rise, so it gets down below to where it can work properly, because a lot of times that fastest current's on the surface.
You're a Z-Man guy. I'm going to give Z-Man some credit here for a second. Z-Man, this is what in current is where you find a good chatterbait versus a bad chatterbait, or a good bladed jig, I guess technically, versus a bad bladed jig. Like the Z-Man and those people that have that quick startup, that's what you need in heavy current. You can't, in some other like more stagnant water, you can cheap out and you can go with the people that have the little split ring in between, and it'll still fire up and be okay eventually. In current, it separates the men from the boys in terms of bladed jigs and what performs and what doesn't.
It really does, man. If you want the a little bit less expensive option that I've used all my life and it still crushes it, the Project Z chatterbait.
Yeah.
It's not... and I like it even in some parts of it. I like even better because it uses the Mustad fast attach clip to work instead of a normal snap swivel. A snap swivel is not symmetrically like perfect. It's actually not. It's a little bit, and it bothers me. And there's a loop instead of pulling from one source, which that Mustad like fast attach clip. It's just one straight wire. Then the loop where you tie on it actually. It just fires and kicks up good, and it actually has these like skirts like this that are the which is the audio podcast. I don't want to see this except for you and I, but they're like the ones that you can just the easy skirts that have that.
Yeah.
And typically those are not seen in the fishing industry as good as a hand tied copper wire. But I tell you what is good about this that people don't realize, that main almost that broader that makes it that easy to kind of like the rubber silicone thing to put on there actually lets it. Displaces more water. It spreads it out.
It's
wider,
not as
so it
tight
displaces
to the
more
collar.
water. It's not as tight. Yeah. And that is good for the fish sensing it. Plus you're going to put a trailer on it. But anyway, that Project Z has that. And it also, this skirt doesn't have it, but it also has a little bit longer, a portion of it's a longer tail. It kind of gives it tapers down like a fish. Anyway, I'm just saying that if you want to go with that version, I have caught so many good fish on that version, that breaking brim color. It looks like a bluegill. I think a lot of your biggest fish eat bluegill, like they really prefer and want a bluegill, your biggest bass in fisheries. I've just seen them before. I've seen them struggling to, they're jumping, trying to get them down their mouths. They just love to eat bluegill, like your biggest bass eat crappie too. So that's a good one. And just throw it with like a green pumpkin trailer, like a minnows or a diesel minnow, like a 5-inch diesel minnow is really good too. It gives the water's murkier and stained. You can put a 5-inch on it or go with that white and chartreuse color with a white in murky water. But anyway, the chatterbait is for sure a winner. It's easy to feel and understand when you're getting a bite and when it's not working properly. It's fouled up, which like hardly ever is fouled, but your rod tip's vibrating like crazy. It's just the easy bait to use. It's a chunk and wind, and it's doing the erratic action for you. I know a lot of people, mainly when they're fishing lakes, are like, oh, I'm doing this, or I'm jerking, I'm stopping it and doing all these crazy things to it. And I'm like, that blade is doing that like erratic kind of like fleeing or injured minnow, whatever you want to call it, action. You don't need to do. I just literally throw it out and wind it. I like hardly ever. I might slow it down or something. It's someone to get it to go a little deeper, but I'm never like, it's not like a jerk bait like some people. They're just ripping it. Now I get ripping out of grass in a lake and stuff like that, like a rattle trap. There's different techniques they can be good at, but when I'm fishing it in a river, you just don't need to do it. You just need to wind it, and that's it. But the other way I will say would be like a follow-up, and this is kind of brings us again to, it's kind of hard to answer this question because there's like summertime when it's low and clear versus, so the chatterbait's kind of good all around. You might go a little slower and the water's murkier, like I said, put a different color on, and you could still work it in the summer. Maybe use that mini max, which I love for smallmouth, the mini max, and burn it. Make sure you're using like 20-pound braid instead of, lower diameter, which helps that blade actually work and properly. If you ever go down to that mini max, just a little tip on that. But then how always having like a soft plastic, I've been using that 7-inch jerk shad. I know it sounds big to some people, and I've got pictures or videos of my Instagram maybe of talking about this, of actually recap my Susquehanna event from the Bassmaster, and I use a double frog hook on it, and it kind of cradles it, and they hit it from, it's a weighted double frog hook. It's like a Berkeley Fusion double frog hook. I explained kind of how I rig it. there, but because it's a little different. It's a double hook. You can't just thread it on. It's on a single hook. You can't thread it from the point of the hook all the way through because there's two. So anyway, you got to punch a hole through the bottom. But it doesn't matter if you're using that or a normal fluke and a single hook, weighted belly hook. But the reason I would say to have that is just because it's so versatile. You can launch it and skip it over the surface fast for like make it mimic a schooling bait fish that you see in the river all the time that bass are chasing. They're jumping out of the water. You got that with it, but it's also great to have for any other bait you're using. If it's a topwater buzzbait, choppo, that chatterbait, spinnerbait, anytime you miss a fish, have that on. Put it in the exact same spot in your kayak every time. Sometimes I put mine on my left hip and got little like these rod holders in the shoalie that lay the rods back and low. And I'll know, and if I miss a fish, bite, I'll just grab it, throw it right back in there. And then you could do the other typical, I think, technique of a soft plastic jerk bait, that dying, like twitching, like that bass just missed your bait. He's looking for it. He knows he injured it. Where did it go? Get that back in there fast. So I would say those two would be, if we're just going to limit it to two here, that I would definitely have on and use, catch tons of fish on them.
There's a lot of guys around here that have started to get me hip to the jerk shad and all the different ways. Like, obviously, how most people are fishing a fluke, but there's 4, 5, 6 different real sneaky ways around here that dudes are using jerk shads.
Yeah. It's starting to become real popular. I love that bigger size because it does call up the alphas like we talked about. So.
Yeah, I was always like a 4-inch guy, and people around here are 5 and, like you said, 7. I've seen people throwing the big ones, and you're like, oh, okay, well, better get into that. There you go, dropping some
8.
Juice.
They do
some
make
guys
an 8
are going to be mad about this one.
The 8's are called the Streaks, actually. The Streaks XL. They make an 8. I think they still sell that one. But yeah, dropping juice, man. That's what you come on Tackle Talk. You got to give up all the juice,
gotta have
man.
something.
Awesome show. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you, man. Before we let you go, too, you're everywhere, right? You're everywhere. You're doing everything. Where can folks keep up with everything you're doing? I mean, dude, you've got on the Crescent side, you've got your own tournament side, you've got the Kayak Adventure series. Like, I don't know how you have time in the day to sleep, but where can folks find everything Drew Gregory at?
YouTube, I'm Drew Gregory Fishing. Same thing on Instagram and Facebook. Pretty easy. If you do want to check out the Crescent Kayak, the shoalie, I designed it specifically for rivers. And I need to get you one of these, man. You gotta. I don't know what you're.
I've seen them around here. There's a couple guys that have them, and they're nice.
Yeah,
really thoughtfully designed. And we didn't even really get into it on like what makes a good current kayak.
Right.
It was very evident. You can see this all the time. One thing that drives me absolutely bonkers about the fishing industry in general is that they'll come out with new products, and you can tell they didn't consult the right people that actually use this gear in the right situation. It was a couple issues I had with like the new NK180 Pro that came out, where you're like, you clearly didn't talk to us anybody on some of these things that you improve, but whole different wormhole there. But you can tell that kayak was very thoughtfully designed, and someone who lives in the current, someone who wanted a very maneuverable, very manageable, responsive kayak for these type of situations designed it. So hats off to you. Thanks, man. In general, I've seen them. They're great. Appreciate it. Yeah, CrescentKayaks.com. Go check it out. Check out the shoal. You got dealers all over the country. You can get yourself one, and it's the thing about the shoalie is it's lightweight. It's like 75 pounds. It's small enough. It's still, that to me that's still heavy, but the way kayaks are going these days, that's a very lightweight kayak, and you can still get it to, you can still throw it in your truck bed, still access, car top it. You can still access those sneaky accesses, the hard to reach places, which is why I got into kayak fishing, to fish rivers and creeks and hard to access places where just the fishing is better. Everyone's looking for unpressured fish, whether you're using your electronics and live scope and everything else. You're just trying to find fish that no one else has found. Doesn't matter if they're 30 feet deep on a hump or in some backwater. That's what we're all trying to do. So there's no knock on however you try to do that. But this boat will help you be able to do it just because it does maneuver so well in current. There, it's very flat on the bottom, so there's nothing like sticking down, no weird undulations, no crazy stuff in the hole, which is going to get when your side current friction of the water, the force of the water hitting those side walls, and it just, water can slide underneath. You can ferry really well and eddy across, eddy out and ferry. It's going to give you the best chance, but it's not as wide and initially as stable. So I always tell people it's like riding a bike. You might, when you're 4, 5, 6 years old, learning to ride a bike, you definitely, were a little wobbly at the beginning, but at 2-3 weeks or whatever, a month or two, you're jumping off the curb, you're going fast, you're just
it's just crazy, like just doing stuff you never thought you'd be doing. You do not want to get into a kayak if you're a river fisherman. We're talking current here today. That is so stable and so heavy that it's hard to paddle, because you need to be able to turn that kayak away from those obstacles that you see in front of you that you're about to crash into.
Yeah, it's not a PA-12, and it wasn't meant to be a PA-12.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very different. Yeah,
the side of that kayak, the broad side, and how deep that straight wall that goes down. Most kayaks, right? Ours has a lot of curvatures, so it lets the water slide underneath it instead of letting that water push you to the obstacle you're trying to turn to start going the opposite way to avoid. And if it's heavier, those paddle strokes, it's going to take you longer to get moving. So just keep in mind that where it lacks in that stability that you might do a demo and other bigger kayaks, you will feel comfortable in it in like a month or two, and many trips you'll be like, oh wow, thank God. And now you don't have this big heavy kayak. You can stand in it comfortably. May not feel like it at first. Most everyone who's in a shoal stands in it super comfortably. It's got a 450-pound weight capacity. I've got power poles on it and all these batteries and motors. It can hold a lot of stuff. But anyway, I just want to say that about that kayak, because that's like, if I made it bigger and heavier, then it would not be truly that great for the river. So it's at this nice size. I do have a new product coming out soon, a new kayak coming out probably late winter, early spring for next year from Crescent. So keep an eye out for that. I think it's going to be right up your alley as well. So we'll talk about that offline here.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, you guys just follow along with the tournaments next year and everything we're doing. It's the Kayak Adventure Series. It's kayakadventureseries.com. It's a lot of fun, so go check it out, and love to see you there. You did a seminar at one of them at our Bash U Brunch, what we call Bash U Brunch on Fridays. So it's not just a tournament; it's a whole social experience, guys. Love to see you guys out at them, and yeah, they're a lot of fun.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the one and only Mr. Drew Gregory. Drew, thank you so much for stopping by today, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, that is our episode today. We appreciate Drew stopping by and dropping some kayak and current tips for us. He's one of the best, and he's made his career fishing in skinny, fast water, the majority of the time not with electronics or anything fancy, just knowledge, experience, and instinct. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Also, a quick note before we go. I don't normally put the full video of episodes up on YouTube. You guys know that. It's usually just audio, but I got my act together and I edited the full video interview of our episode last week with Mark Zona, and I put it up on our YouTube channel, and it's worth a watch. There's just so many moments that the visuals and the facial expressions and everything make that conversation even better than it was just through audio, and I wanted to make sure that we were able to capture that and kind of archive that somehow, so I edited it, I put it all up on our YouTube channel. I realize basically none of our listeners here at Tackle Talk listen on YouTube. I get that. 99.9% of you listen on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Amazon, things like that, because we're almost always just an audio style show. I get that. But if you want to actually watch the episode, you do at least have the option now with the Mark Zona episode, which is now live over on our YouTube channel. But other than that, as always, if you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor, head over to Apple or Spotify and leave us a 5-star review. Also, if you're over on Apple Podcasts, leaving us a written review helps a ton. Other than that, you can find us on social media at Tackle Talk Podcast. Find us on the web, tackletalkpodcast.com, and we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2021. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.